Sky Arts travelled down to St Austell in Cornwall to visit the Eden Project and its new commissioned work entitled Seed. The sculpture forms the centrepiece to the educational resource building known as the Core. Artist Peter Randall Page spent 4 years bringing Seed and its position within the Core to life. It marks an ongoing commitment by the Eden Project to unite art and design with ecological and environmental interests.
We've been talking to Peter, as we had a number of artists kind of in the early stages of the project, about possible collaboration. And Peter had come up with a number of ideas, in particular to do with how plants have inspired architectural form and design, aesthetic and form throughout kind of history, which has been an area of profound interest for him. And we started to talk through a deeper level of collaboration, really, which was about how we could use Peter's conceptual framework, his area of inspiration, literally to inform the design of a building.
Peter Randall Page studied sculpture at Bath Academy of Art during the 70s. Over the past 25 years, he's gained an international reputation through his sculpture, drawings and prints. His work is held in numerous public and private collections throughout the world, including South Korea, the USA and Japan. Closer to home, a selection of his public sculptures can be found in Cardiff, Bristol and Newcastle.
For us, the challenge was, how do you incorporate plant imagery, botanical imagery and symbolism into a contemporary building in a truly contemporary way? But we didn't want it to be a kind of decorative add-on, and because I'd been involved in looking at all these underlying geometric principles that determine plant growth, we started to talk about whether one could actually make a viable roof structure based on some of these plant geometries.
And I think it's right at the heart of what Eden's trying to do, which is to engage people on an emotional and an intuitive level, rather than just, if you like, transmit facts to people. People can get facts about plants and our relationship with the natural world in a variety of different media. They don't need to do that here.
The geometry of the building itself created this sort of central hub, if you like, right in the middle of the building. And for many years I've been thinking about the idea of making a very large sculpture contained within its own specifically designed space with natural light coming in from above.
At 70 tonnes, Seed weighs as much as 10 elephants. The granite stone it's carved from is estimated to be 300 million years old and is one of the biggest sculptures in history made from a single piece of rock, all of which meant big logistical problems for those involved.
I think the project has been characterised by the identification and then the meeting of enormous challenges all the way through, and actually demanding that everybody involved in the process, from the architects through to the engineers, through to the quarrymen, through to everybody involved at this end of the game, people really had to push to the limits of their abilities and their experience to make this happen, and that's what makes the project this exciting.
Eventually they quarried a stone that weighed 167 tonnes, and we had an extremely large crane which was assembled on site, and that lifted this enormous stone out of the bed of the quarry. And then it was a matter of designing special equipment. Every time you do anything to it, the problems are immense. Every time you turn it over, it's a huge deal. So really, we were kind of reinventing the wheel at every point. But eventually, making the basic shape on the lathe, and then plotting this very complex pattern of nearly 2,000 sort of raised lumps on the surface. It's optically quite interesting, but it's also mathematically very interesting. And it's the kind of pattern that you see on the head of a sunflower or in a pine cone or a fir cone. And it's to do with efficient packing, really. I mean, nature loves efficiency, and this particular kind of arrangement of these spiral alignments of these nodules, in this case, are the most efficient way of actually packing a given number of forms onto a surface.
What's striking about the form and structure of Randall Page's work is the visual pleasure it conveys. What is so satisfying about staring at a piece of granite with 2,000 lumps on it? And where does the optical joy we experience come from?
Those forms, those patterns, act upon human intuition in a very deep, profound way. We connect with them, we engage with them. We may not understand why, but they get to us.
I mean, what's interesting in a way about the patterns that we've been discussing is that people have always enjoyed things which have the golden proportion in them, right back to kind of classical times and before that. It's only really in fairly recent decades that scientists have realised that right hidden in a very, very deeply and in a very unexpected place in plant growth is the golden proportion in the form of the golden angle. And I think people do just have a tremendous pleasure in recognition of the kind of forms that nature makes. I mean, we're part of the natural world. There's a kind of understanding that we have inside ourselves, in a sense, of rightness of form and of a pleasure in patterns. I mean, you think of the kind of delight we take in patterns in music, like, you know, Bach's music or improvised jazz, where you have a pattern which you then move away from and come back to. That pattern that I've used for the sculpture and the same pattern that's used for the roof structure is not only optically very fascinating and mathematically very fascinating, but it really makes us aware of our own cognition taking place.
Peter has lived and worked in Devon for the past 20 years. The majority of his work is honed and crafted in a rented barn at the back of his house. As locations go, it's pretty much perfect.
Well, this is the main area where I work on larger scale things. And there's a number of things here. Some of them are work in progress, some of them are finished. Well, all my work, to some extent, has been informed and inspired by the observation of natural form. And over the years, I've become increasingly interested in what underlies those forms, you know, where they come from, why those patterns appear. And then, obviously, observing the way in which nature has to improvise. It uses those basic principles, but then things happen, and so you get this kind of tension between underlying principles, which are rooted in order, geometric order, and then nature's ability to kind of to get by and make things work. And so with a lot of the work I'm doing now, I'm trying, rather than copying things in nature, I'm actually trying to understand the underlying dynamics that are taking place, these underlying sort of tendencies to order and tendencies to disorder. And by using chaotic forms, eroded boulders, for example, and applying geometric structures onto them, the geometry has to adapt, it has to be a bit forgiving. And so I hope that I'm making things now which actually are to do with getting under the skin of how nature operates. I heard a nice quote actually recently from the American artist Sol LeWitt, who said, he's talking about drawing, and he said that for him a drawing starts off with the shape of the piece of paper, and in a sense something like this, it really struck a chord with me, because this piece, well, all of these start off with the given shape of the piece of stone. This piece of stone is broadly kind of triangular shape. And I decided to impose this kind of triangular geometry onto it. First of all, actually making an elastic net of triangles, quite big triangles, and stretching it over the surface so that the elastic kind of has to distort to accommodate the shape of the stone. And then subdividing those big triangles down, and then just cutting in and using a thing called a pitching tool to very quickly sort of break away. So you get this kind of slightly random quality of these interlocking triangles covering the whole surface. People often think of pattern as being a kind of superficial thing and being something just on the surface of things. There's a big difference between pattern and decoration. I mean, pattern to me is a deeply profound thing. Pattern runs right the way through everything we see in the world around us. This is about 10 tons, this granite boulder, and it comes from Finland. I went to Finland specifically to find something of this kind of scale, and I also wanted something of this kind of colour. It's based on a kind of pattern which involves this raised area being one continuous line. It's like a labyrinth that covers the whole surface, which is quite a puzzle to try and work out. And of course, unless you were to kind of lift it up and crawl underneath, you wouldn't really know it was a continuous line, but for me it's important that it is. I think fundamentally what really interests me is actually what makes us tick. And I think in the end, you know, I'm not particularly interested in stones per se, even though I work in stone. For me, working in stone is a vehicle for understanding both my own psyche, if you like, and hopefully that of other people. It's always an act of faith that what you're experiencing and your own emotional experience of something is going to be shared by other people. But when it is, and when people do actually pick up on things which are, you know, kind of intangible in a sense, you've made an object, you've made a shape, and you hope people respond to it. But when they do, you know, that's a fantastic thing.